Silas smirked faintly. He called twice. Hung up both times. Good. Let him sit with it. One afternoon, I stood in front of a mirror in a borrowed jacket that actually fit. For the first time, I didn't look like someone apologizing for existing. I looked like someone who had choices. Julian watched from the doorway. You don't have to confront him, he said. Not ever. I know, I replied. But I want to. Not to shout. Not to beg. To be seen. The meeting was set quietly. Neutral ground. Lawyers present. No surprises. Marcus walked in first. He looked smaller. Not physically, he was still broad, still imposing, but something about him had shifted. His certainty was gone. When he saw me, his jaw tightened. You planned this, he said. I met his gaze evenly. You ended it. He scoffed. You think this changes anything? It already has, I replied. Julian entered behind me. Marcus went pale. The room held its breath. You lied, Julian said calmly. For years. Marcus laughed harshly. You lost. No, Julian said. I waited. Silence stretched. For the first time in my life, Marcus didn't control the room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply stood there. And that, somehow, was enough. Because he could no longer pretend I didn't exist. And he knew, deep down, that the story he'd written was no longer his to tell. Marcus didn't speak again after that meeting. Not to me. Not to Julian. Not even to his lawyers, according to Silas. He left the room with the same stiff posture he always carried, but the difference was unmistakable. He no longer looked in control. For the first time since I'd known him, Marcus looked like a man whose story had slipped out of his hands. I thought I would feel satisfaction. Instead, I felt something quieter. Relief. Because the moment I stopped needing his acknowledgement, he lost his power over me. The days that followed felt unreal, like I was living in someone else's life. I moved through Julian's house slowly, touching things as if they might disappear if I moved too fast. Every room carried traces of intention, books he'd marked for me, photos he'd kept even when it hurt to look at them, space he'd never filled because part of him had been waiting. For me. One evening, I found him sitting on the back porch, staring out at the trees as the sun dipped below the horizon. You okay? I asked. Julian smiled faintly. Better than I've been in 22 years. I sat beside him, the wood warm beneath us. I keep thinking, I said quietly, about how close I came to believing him. To believing I didn't matter. Julian turned toward me fully. You mattered the moment you existed. Nothing Marcus said ever changed that. I nodded, but the weight of it still pressed on my chest. What about my mom? I asked. Julian didn't answer right away. She loved you, he said finally. But she chose fear over truth. That doesn't make her evil. It makes her human. It wasn't the answer I wanted. But it was the honest one. A week later, I went back to the house on Westmore Drive. Alone. The place looked smaller than I remembered. The lawn was overgrown. The windows dark. When the door opened, my mother stood there, eyes wide, as if she'd been holding her breath for days. Noah, she whispered. We stood there in silence, years of unspoken words hanging between us. I know, I said before she could speak. About Julian. About everything. Her shoulders sagged. I was afraid, she said, tears spilling freely now. Marcus said he'd take you from me if I let him back into your life. He already took me, I replied gently. That truth settled between us, heavy and unavoidable. I don't hate you, I said. But I won't pretend it didn't hurt. She nodded, sobbing quietly. I just needed you to know, I added, that I found him. And he never stopped loving me. For the first time, I saw something break through her fear. Relief. I left without anger. Without closure wrapped in apologies. Some doors don't need to be slammed to be closed. Weeks turned into months. Life didn't magically become perfect. Healing never works that way. There were nights I woke up disoriented, expecting to hear Marcus's footsteps. Moments when compliments felt suspicious, kindness felt conditional. But Julian was patient. He never tried to replace what I'd lost. He only offered what he had always wanted to give. Time. Choice. Love without conditions. We built routines together, morning coffee, late-night conversations, shared silence that didn't feel heavy. He taught me things he'd saved up for decades. Not lectures. Just moments. How to drive a manual car. How to cook a meal without rushing. How to sit with difficult feelings without trying to erase them. One night, as we sat going through the last unopened box of letters, I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my chest for weeks. What would have happened, I asked, if he hadn't thrown me out? Julian met my eyes. Then we might still be waiting. That truth stunned me. Marcus's cruelty hadn't destroyed me. It had freed me. The irony settled deep. I didn't need to confront him again. I didn't need an apology he would never truly mean. The life I was building was the answer. One afternoon, I passed a mirror and caught my reflection, and didn't flinch. I looked grounded, present, whole. For the first time, I wasn't surviving someone else's decisions. I was choosing my own. Months later, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single sentence, written in familiar handwriting. I did what I thought was best. I folded the paper once and placed it in a drawer. Not everything needs a response. Some endings speak loudest in silence. Today, when I think back to that rainy night, standing alone with a plastic bag in my hand, I don't feel shame anymore. I feel gratitude. Because that was the moment everything false fell away. That was the moment my real life began. Family, I learned, isn't who keeps you out of obligation. It's who claims you without hesitation. Who fights for you when you're not there to fight for yourself. Who waits, even when it hurts. Marcus gave me a bag and a door. Julian gave me a home. And the difference between the two taught me more about love than 22 years of silence ever could. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that truth has a way of finding us, sometimes through pain, sometimes through unexpected kindness, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share where you're watching from. Your support helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. On my 22nd birthday, my family finally stopped pretending. In front of people who had just finished singing for me, my stepfather looked me in the eye and said I wasn't his son, then told me to leave. I walked into the rain with a plastic bag and nowhere to go, believing that was the end of my story. I was wrong. Because minutes later, a car pulled up beside me, and one sentence from a stranger unraveled everything they had hidden for years. Before I tell you how that night unfolded, and how walking out of that house set off a chain of events no one could reverse, do me a small favor. If stories about truth, betrayal, and unexpected turning points resonate with you, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most. The cake was still on the table when it happened. The candles had burned down unevenly, wax pooling into the frosting, the smell of sugar and smoke hanging in the air. My friends were laughing too loudly, the way people do when they're trying to convince themselves everything is normal. My mother, Elena Viral, stood near the counter pretending to straighten napkins that didn't need fixing. For a few fragile seconds, I let myself believe this birthday might be different. I had just turned 22. Old enough to stop waiting. Old enough to think maybe I had earned a place. Then Marcus Viral stood up. The scrape of his chair against the floor cut through the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone's laugh trailed off awkwardly. Even the music playing softly from a speaker in the corner seemed to fade. Marcus didn't rush. He never did. He liked control. He liked choosing the moment. He looked straight at me, not with anger, not even with disgust, but with certainty. "You're not truly my son," he said. The words didn't echo. They dropped. Heavy. Final. For a second, I laughed, sharp and breathless, because surely this was some kind of twisted joke. 22 years alive. 12 under his roof. And he chose now? In front of everyone? But Marcus didn't smile. He bent down, reached beside his chair, and lifted a thin plastic bag. The handles were stretched white from strain. He tossed it across the room. It landed at my feet. Inside were my clothes. Not all of them. Just the ones he considered mine. The room froze. My ears rang. My chest tightened. I looked at my mother, silently begging her to say something, anything. Her eyes filled with tears, her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her silence hit harder than Marcus's voice ever could. "Get out," Marcus said calmly. "Tonight." Someone shifted uncomfortably. One of my friends half stood, muttering under his breath, but I shook my head. I didn't want anyone else dragged into this. This humiliation was already mine alone. I bent down and picked up the bag. It was light. That realization cracked something inside me. Everything I owned, everything I was allowed to keep, fit into a single plastic bag. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't shout. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard my mother whisper my name, but it was weak, almost apologetic. She didn't follow. She didn't stop him. She didn't choose me. The rain hit me before I reached the steps. Cold. Sharp. Relentless. It soaked through my shirt in seconds, plastered my hair to my face, and blurred my vision until the streetlights smeared into streaks of yellow and white. The door closed behind me, not slammed, just closed carefully, like I was never meant to come back. I walked. No plan. No destination. Just forward. Each step felt heavier than the last. My shoes filled with water. My fingers burned as the plastic bag cut into my skin. I welcomed the pain. It kept me upright. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew where I couldn't stay. Growing up in Greyford's Westmoor district, I always felt like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. Marcus made sure of that. He controlled everything, what we ate, who we invited over, when lights went off. If I left a dish in the sink, he reminded me it wasn't his responsibility to clean up after someone else's kid. If I asked for help, he told me to figure it out myself. My mother loved me, I know she did, but she lived in quiet compromises. She worked long hours, came home exhausted, and chose peace over confrontation every time. She would squeeze my hand and whisper, "Don't push him." I learned early that silence was safer than honesty. I spent years believing if I behaved better, worked harder, stayed quieter, he might finally accept me. That night proved he never would. The rain blurred everything as I walked farther into the darkness. Warm light spilled from houses I passed, families inside eating dinner, laughing, living lives I never seemed to belong to. My chest ached with questions I didn't want answers to yet. Where would I sleep? Would my mother come after me? Had any of it been real? Then I heard it. The low hum of an engine behind me. At first, I ignored it. Cars passed all the time. But this one slowed. Headlights washed over me, then eased back. Tires whispered against wet pavement. A sleek black car pulled up beside me. The window slid down smoothly. A man leaned out, his face half hidden by shadow, his voice calm in a way that didn't belong to the storm. "Noah Viral?" he asked. My grip tightened on the bag. "Yes." He nodded once, like he'd been waiting a long time for that answer. "Your actual dad sent me." The rain didn't stop. The street didn't disappear. But everything I thought I knew about my life cracked wide open. And that was only the beginning. For a long second, I just stood there in the rain, staring at the man in the black car as if he'd spoken a language I didn't understand. "My, what?" I finally managed. "Your actual dad," he repeated calmly, like this was the most ordinary sentence in the world. "He asked me to find you." Every instinct in my body screamed to run. 22 years of living under Marcus's roof had trained me to expect traps disguised as kindness. Strangers didn't stop for you in the rain. They didn't know your name. And they definitely didn't claim to know anything about a father I'd been told not to ask about. "I don't know you," I said, tightening my grip on the bag. "And I don't know what game this is." The man didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice or lean closer. He simply opened his jacket slightly and pulled out a folded envelope. He held it up so I could see my name written across the front in careful, deliberate handwriting. Noah. Not kid. Not boy. Not him. My name. Something inside my chest shifted. "My name is Silas Crow," he said. "I was hired to look for you. I've been watching that house for weeks, waiting for tonight." My stomach dropped. "You were watching?" I snapped. "That's supposed to make this better?" Silas nodded once, slow. "I was watching to make sure you weren't alone when he finally did it." The rain hammered down harder, like the sky was trying to drown the conversation. I laughed, short and bitter. "Finally did what?" Silas's eyes flicked toward the street behind me, the direction of the house I'd just left. The lights were barely visible through the rain now. "Push you out," he said quietly. I felt the sting behind my eyes and hated it. I turned away, scrubbing rain from my face with my sleeve. "You don't know anything about my life," I said. "You don't know him. You don't know what it's been like." Silas didn't interrupt. He waited until I looked back at him. "I know Marcus Viral filed 3 legal notices over the last decade warning a man named Julian Ashcroft to stay away from you," he said. "I know your mother signed 2 of them. And I know Julian never stopped trying anyway." The world tilted. Julian Ashcroft. The name landed like a ghost stepping into the room. I'd heard it once before, years ago, whispered late at night when my mother thought I was asleep. She'd said it softly, almost like a prayer. When I asked her the next morning, she'd gone quiet and told me I'd dreamed it. I hadn't. "You're lying," I said, but my voice didn't carry any strength. Silas shook his head. "I wish I was." Thunder cracked overhead. Water streamed down my neck, my hands numb from cold and shock. If he wanted me, I demanded, where was he? Why didn't he come himself? Silas's jaw tightened. Because he wasn't allowed to. I stared at him. "Marcus made sure of that," Silas continued. "Restraining orders. Threats. Lawyers. He painted Julian as unstable, dangerous. Said contact would confuse you. The courts believed him." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. "That's not possible," I whispered. "My mom would never." Silas met my eyes. "Your mother was afraid." The words hit differently than I expected. Not like an accusation. Like a fact. "She chose peace," he added. "Even if it cost you the truth." I thought of her standing by the table tonight. The way her hands shook. The way she couldn't look at me as Marcus spoke. My chest burned. So what? I said, voice cracking. This Julian guy just waited? Silas nodded. For years. He reached into the back seat and pulled out a thin folder, holding it out toward me. Open it. I hesitated, then took it with shaking hands. Inside were copies of letters. Dozens of them. All addressed to me. All unopened. My breath caught as I scanned the dates. Birthdays. Holidays. School years. There was a photo clipped to one page, a man standing outside a courthouse, holding a folded piece of paper, his shoulders slumped but his eyes fixed forward with stubborn resolve. I saw my face in his. Same jawline. Same eyes. Same sadness. He wrote you every year, Silas said. Couldn't send them. But he kept them anyway. My knees felt weak. He knew tonight was coming, Silas added. He asked me to be close. Said Marcus had been waiting for the moment you stopped being legally useful. The rain blurred my vision, but I didn't bother wiping it away. All this time, I whispered. I thought I wasn't enough. Silas shook his head. You were too much. For the wrong man. Silence settled between us, heavy but different now. Not empty. Expectant. Where is he? I asked finally. Silas didn't answer right away. He opened the car door. Get in, he said gently. You don't need to stand out here anymore. Every instinct screamed again, fear, doubt, years of conditioning telling me not to trust. But then I looked down at the bag in my hands. Everything I owned. Then back at the street behind me. Nothing waiting. I stepped into the car. Warmth wrapped around me instantly. The door shut, muting the storm, leaving only the steady hum of the engine and my own uneven breathing. Silas pulled back onto the road. Where are we going? I asked. He glanced at me in the mirror. To someone who never stopped calling you his son. We drove in silence for a while, the city lights thinning as Greyford fell behind us. My clothes were still damp, but I didn't feel cold anymore. My mind raced, piecing together moments from my childhood that suddenly made sense, the unexplained tension, the unasked questions, the way Marcus's resentment always felt personal. You're free now, Silas said suddenly. The word felt unreal. Free. I stared out the window as the rain softened to a drizzle, the road stretching ahead into darkness. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away from something. I was being led toward the truth. And whatever waited at the end of that road, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The road stretched ahead of us like a ribbon pulled tight through the dark. Streetlights thinned, then disappeared altogether, replaced by long shadows and the soft hiss of tires on wet asphalt. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, my damp clothes clinging to me, the plastic bag resting at my feet like proof of who I had been just an hour earlier. Silas didn't rush the silence. That alone told me this wasn't a trick. After several miles, I spoke. If he's real, if he wanted me, why didn't he fight harder? Silas's fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel. He did. I turned toward him. Then why did I grow up believing I was unwanted? Silas exhaled slowly. Because sometimes the people who lose don't get to tell their side of the story. He reached into the center console and pulled out a small voice recorder. He set it between us. He asked me to give you this when the time was right, Silas said. I think tonight qualifies. My heart hammered as I pressed the button. Static crackled. Then a man's voice filled the car, steady, deep, threaded with something raw beneath the surface. Noah, if you're hearing this, then Marcus finally did what I always knew he would. I sucked in a sharp breath. That voice, I whispered. That's him. Silas nodded. The recording continued. I've waited a long time to speak to you without lawyers standing between us. I want you to know something before anything else, there was never a day I didn't look for you. Not one. My vision blurred. I was young and stupid when you were born, the voice said. I trusted the wrong people. I believed promises that were easier than truth. And when I realized what I'd done, it was already too late. The sound of a pause. A breath. Marcus didn't want a reminder of me in his house. He wanted control. And the easiest way to keep it was to convince you, and everyone else, that I didn't care. Anger surged through me, hot and dizzying. He lied, I muttered. Yes, Silas said quietly. He did. The recording crackled again. I tried everything. Letters. Court filings. Mediators. Private investigators. Your mother was trapped. She thought she was protecting you by keeping the peace. I don't forgive that choice, but I understand it. The words landed heavy. If you're hearing this, the voice went on, then you're free now. And if you choose never to see me, I'll accept that. I just couldn't live knowing you still thought you were unwanted. The recording ended. The car hummed softly around us. I stared at the dashboard, my chest aching like something had finally been pulled loose. All those years, I whispered. Every time Marcus looked at me like I didn't belong. He was afraid, Silas said. Not of you. Of what you represented. What do you mean? Silas glanced at me. Julian didn't just disappear. He rebuilt his life. He became someone Marcus couldn't intimidate anymore. We turned off the main road onto a long, winding driveway lined with tall trees. Lights glowed faintly in the distance. Where are we? I asked. Westbridge, Silas replied. Julian's home. The word hit me harder than I expected. Home. The car slowed to a stop in front of a large but understated house, warm light spilling through wide windows, rain tapping gently against the roof. It didn't look like a fortress. It looked lived in. Silas turned to me. You don't have to go in. If you want time. No, I said quickly, surprising myself. I need to see him. My legs felt unsteady as I stepped out of the car. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the air cool and clean. The front door opened before I reached it. A man stood there. Older than the photo I'd seen, gray threaded through his dark hair, lines etched deep around his eyes. But the moment he looked at me, something passed between us, recognition so immediate it stole my breath. Noah, he said, his voice breaking. I froze. Years of doubt, of believing I was disposable, rose up like a wall between us. You're real, I managed. Julian Ashcroft stepped forward slowly, as if afraid I might vanish. I am. And I've been waiting for you every day of your life. The wall crumbled. I didn't remember moving, but suddenly I was in his arms. He held me like he'd been afraid of this moment slipping away forever, tight, steady, unshaking. I cried. Not quietly. Not politely. I cried for the boy who waited by the door for a man who never came. For the years I spent shrinking myself to fit into someone else's resentment. For the birthdays that passed without explanation. Julian held me through all of it. You were never unwanted, he whispered into my hair. You were taken from me. There's a difference. We sat at the kitchen table later, mugs of something warm between us. Julian watched me like he was memorizing my face, afraid to miss a detail. I wanted to tell you everything, he said. But first, you need to know what Marcus did. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of legal filings. Emails. Threats. Warnings sent to Julian. Notices filed by Marcus. And one email, printed, highlighted. If you continue attempting contact, we will pursue criminal charges. Noah is stable. Your presence is disruptive. Marcus's words. Julian's hand shook slightly as he closed the folder. He made sure I looked dangerous. Unstable. Anything to keep me away. My stomach churned. All those times he said I was nothing to him, I said slowly. He wasn't talking about me, was he? Julian shook his head. He was talking about himself. Silence settled between us, thick with understanding. What happens now? I asked. Julian looked at me with something like hope and caution. That depends on you, he said. I won't force anything. I already lost you once. I thought of Marcus's face. His certainty. His relief when he told me to leave. Then I thought of this man, who had spent years fighting doors he couldn't open. I don't know how to be a son, I admitted. Julian smiled softly. Then we'll learn together. That night, as I lay in a guest room that didn't feel temporary, I stared at the ceiling and realized something that changed everything. Marcus didn't end my life when he threw me out. He started it. And he had no idea what he'd set in motion. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because the bed was uncomfortable, it was the most comfortable place I'd ever slept, but because my mind wouldn't slow down. Every time I closed my eyes, memories rearranged themselves. Moments I had dismissed as normal suddenly revealed sharp edges. Marcus's rules. His resentment. The way he always watched me like I was something he tolerated, not raised. And now I knew why. Morning came quietly. No shouting. No slammed doors. No tension thick enough to taste. Just the sound of someone moving around in the kitchen, humming under their breath. I followed the sound. Julian stood at the counter, sleeves rolled up, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He looked older in the daylight, but lighter somehow, like a weight he'd carried for decades had finally shifted. Did you sleep at all? He asked gently. A little, I lied. He nodded like he expected that. We sat across from each other, steam rising between us. I noticed details I'd never paid attention to in my own home, photos on the walls. Not staged. Not formal. Moments frozen mid-laugh. Friends. Colleagues. Places he'd traveled. A life lived openly. And yet, there were empty spaces too. You kept a room, I said quietly. Julian followed my gaze down the hallway. Always. Something tightened in my chest. I didn't know if you'd want it, he added. But I couldn't imagine a house without space for you. No one had ever made space for me before. After breakfast, he showed me everything. Boxes stacked neatly in a study I hadn't seen yet. Files organized by year. Photos. Letters. All of it is yours, he said. Every attempt. Every lead. I opened a box labeled Year 12. Inside were school photos I didn't know were public. Copies of my name from competition lists. Newspaper clippings from small local events. My face circled in red pen, question marks scribbled in the margins. He'd been watching from a distance. Not stalking. Searching. I didn't want to scare you, he said quietly. I just wanted to know you were okay. The word okay hit me harder than expected. Marcus never asked that. I picked up a letter from the stack. The envelope was yellowed, corners soft with age. Can I asked. Julian nodded. I opened it carefully. Noah, you're 12 today. I don't know what you like yet, or if you even know I exist, but I hope someone told you they're proud of you. I am. Every day. I wish I could say that to your face. My hands trembled. How many? I asked. Julian swallowed. One for every birthday. And a few extras on the harder years. I didn't ask how he knew which years were harder. I already understood. The anger came later. It crept in slowly, quietly, as truths stacked on top of each other. Each letter was proof, not just of love, but of theft. Years stolen by lies. A childhood shaped by resentment that never belonged to me. Marcus hadn't just rejected me. He had erased someone else. By midday, Silas returned. There's something else you should know, he said carefully, glancing between Julian and me. I felt my stomach drop. Marcus didn't just push Julian out, Silas continued. He benefited from it. Julian closed his eyes briefly. What do you mean? I asked. Silas pulled out a tablet and turned it toward me. Bank records. Legal settlements. Transfers masked as consulting fees. He leveraged your presence, Silas said. Used it as leverage in negotiations. Threatened exposure. Implied instability. I stared at the screen. He used me, I whispered. Julian nodded. As a shield. And a weapon. The rage that surged through me was different from anything I'd felt before. Not loud. Not explosive. Cold. Focused. All those years I tried to be better. Quieter. Smaller. And he had been profiting from my existence. What happens now? I asked. Silas didn't answer immediately. That depends, he said finally, on what you want. I thought of Marcus's face the night before. The relief in his eyes when he told me to leave. The certainty that he'd won. I thought of my mother's silence. I want the truth, I said. Julian met my gaze. Then we'll tell it. The days that followed moved fast. Too fast. Lawyers. Meetings. Documents laid out across polished tables. My name printed in places I never expected to see it. Noah Ashcroft. It felt strange. Heavy. Real. Julian didn't push. He explained everything slowly, patiently, like he was afraid of overwhelming me. Marcus had blocked contact. Threatened lawsuits. Painted Julian as unstable while quietly benefiting from his absence. And now, the walls he built were starting to crack. Marcus knows, Silas said one evening. He knows you're here. I felt a flicker of something sharp in my chest. Did he say anything?